So earlier this week, I was implementing uh, drag and drop sorting for uh, the probably 10th time in my career. And in the old days, I would have followed this Railscast for sortable lists here using jQuery and the sortable library here. Um, and when you drag and drop, you're going to get this URL either on the form or outside of the collection of items, and then serialize all the items and send them all to this sort endpoint where it's going to iterate over each one of those IDs of whatever items you're sorting and with an index, and then update the position for all of those in the collection. And I'm not using jQuery here anymore. I'm actually migrating this app over to be using Stimulus and Turbo, and actually using the Shopify Draggable library now. And so I didn't want to go this approach. And then there are a couple other things that kind of bothered me. One was I don't love that when you're doing a sort like this, you're actually manipulating one element and not the entire collection. So I don't love the idea that it's sending all of the IDs back to say, here's this whole collection, resort them all. It feels like to me like you're really just updating one thing. The other thing is, when possible, I prefer not to do custom one-off actions. I'd like to keep my routes RESTful. And so I'm thinking about like, what is this? What am I doing? Is there a way to make this RESTful? And so here's what I came up with. First off, I've got this list insertions controller. So I think about like a single item, and what I'm really doing when I'm dragging and dropping is I'm inserting it at a certain position. Now, that works with this insert at method within the access list library. However, you have to pass in an integer position where you want it to be in the list, and I've had problems in the past where if there are gaps, you may not be positioning in the right way to get the sort order that you want. So what I really want to do is I want to pass the item that's being sorted along with the precursor, the thing that comes right before it. So insert this after this. And so what I came up with is a list insertions controller, which I'm creating an insertion, a list insertion. I've got an item to be inserted, and then a precursor to insert it after. And I needed to come up with my own insert after. So this item is being inserted after a precursor. In the case where the precursor doesn't exist, if it's at the top of the list, then that's going to be null. And so it needs to just go at the beginning of the list. And so if I have in my model here, I've got like a concern, active record concern called list insertable. And this is what that looks like. I've got this insert after method that gets called on the instance of the model, whatever it's mixed into. And first it says like, if the item is the precursor, bail early. I don't want to do anything then. If the precursor is blank, meaning it wasn't passed in, then there's nothing before that in the list. I'm at the top of the list. I'm inserting after nothing, so it needs to move to top, and this is a method that comes from access list. Then I have a couple checks here. I need to make sure that the scope conditions are the same for whatever this model is. In this case, I'm scope to user, so I need to make sure their scopes match, or I need to raise. You could also just return false or something like that. I'm also making sure that the precursor is in the list, because if it's nil, then I won't know what position to put this at. So then I need to get my insertion position. And for this, I've got I'm calling this method here to check what the precursor's position is and add one to it. So I want to be one after the precursor. If the position is blank, meaning the position of this item is nil currently, or if the position is greater than the precursor's position, and finally, like if neither of those conditions is met, then I want to put the item at the precursor's position. And that is if in the case where this item is higher in the list, meaning it has a lower position, it needs to replace that, because when they shuffle them, everything from precursor back is going to shift up, and then my item is going to move down into the precursor's position. So then if they match, I want to bail, and then otherwise call insert at, which is the axis list method there. So now I've got like an item and a precursor. One of the things that I love about this is using global IDs. So this controller now could work for any model type where I'm have axis list on it, and where I need to do some kind of sorting. And what that looks like in, let's see, in the collection here, I've got a stimulus controller for sortable, and the endpoint for doing the sorting, which is the list insertions endpoint. Then each instance that's drag and droppable here is an item, and it's got its global ID here. And that's what's going to get passed in the stimulus controller. This is using Shopify Draggable. The interesting bits are when sortable stops, meaning when you drag and release, then I'm going to pick up the index of the item that I was moving, and its precursor, the one that came right before it. And then I'm going to call post here. This post method is going to use Rails request.js, and I'm going to send the sortable GID for the item and the precursor to that endpoint. So that's how that works there. And to me, this is a little bit better because, number one, I'm using this built-in method that comes from the axis list gem under the hood, but I've given it what to me is a nicer interface where I'm working with active record objects directly. And this is a reusable controller, a reusable pattern that could be used in for other types of objects, and I don't need to re-implement it or have separate sort actions for each one of those.